Welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, the podcast that helps you make great career decisions. My name is Mike Dickson, and I'm a professional sales and marketing recruiter. I love what I do, but my biggest frustration is seeing too many people not realizing their career potential. In this podcast, I'll introduce you to my network, an amazing group of business leaders from the biggest tier 1 organizations through to some super fast growth SMEs. They'll share their career journeys and give unique advice and insights on managing your career and leading a function and a business. Join me, Mike Dickson of AXR Recruitment and Search, to help guide your future in sales and marketing. Well, hello and welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, with me, Mike Dickson, Director of AXR Recruitment and Search. Now, today's a special podcast. 1, we're partnering with the Marketing Academy. 2, we're running a live coaching session on getting interview fit. And 3, we're live streaming to the TMA alumni. Now, regular listeners to the pod will remember episode 76, and we shone a spotlight on the TMA with alumni Jade, Lish, who's in the room today, and Jane King. If you missed that, TMA is a not-for-profit that develops leadership capability in marketers. One of the many streams it runs is called TMA Support, which provides practical advice and connection to alumni whose roles have been impacted by redundancy. TMA Support is partnering with AXR, that's my business, a specialist marketing recruiter, to give practical support in helping alumni be ready for a career conversation, to enable great career decision-making, and to maximize your opportunity of joining the right organization in the right role. In today's pod, I'm going to interview Phil Moig, a TMA 2022 scholar and Group Business Director of PhD. Our role as a recruiter is to help everyone we work with be interview fit, to land your narrative authentically and with impact. Now, we call them a coaching interview, and today, Phil has volunteered to be coached. Before we start, as a disclaimer, from a commercial confidence perspective, not everything Phil will say might be exactly real, but it'll be close. So just to kind of protect the confidence of the businesses she's worked within. Now, I mentioned Jade's in the room as well. So Jade's going to open up the live chat, guys. So for those who are on the live call, it's a TMA alumni. Ask questions. Jade will be monitoring. And if she thinks you've hit the mark of quality of question, she'll jump in and ask as we go. Okay, so let's get into it. Interviews are not all structured. Some are, most are messy. But if you understand what's being asked, then you can land your narrative no matter what's going on in the interview. You know where you're at. This will be a structured session. We're going to run through 3 parts with Phil, and I'll explain each as we go, giving Phil some feedback and builds on her answers in true coaching style. So section 1 in most interviews follows the same format, whether it's messy or otherwise. It's like this getting to know you introduction part. It's a really, question can come at you from different ways, but it's normally, hey, just take me through your resume, or give me an overview of you, or, talk me through your career to date. And there's normally no context. You left there thinking, oh, okay, what do I talk about? How long do I talk for? Do I land every achievement? Is this my sales pitch? And it's not. This is your opportunity to create a platform for the rest of the interview to discuss your career, not the great things you've done, that will come later, but actually, how did you get to now? What were the key decisions? What were the kind of inflection points? You're also weaving in, if you can, a bit about you to create some social capital between you and the interviewer. Life and careers don't operate in independent bubbles. One influences the other. So reveal a bit about you, make it authentic as you go, Phil. And if you can create the perfect dismount at the end of this story, and it's a 5-minute story, we'll try and stick to that, is what does the future look like? So the journey to now is interesting, but what does the future look like? Now, we're not interviewing you for a role today, but if you were, you could align that future then to that organization and that role. And you're telling the interviewer, I'm actually a candidate. I'm not just here because I've got a good hour to spend. I'm a real candidate. I'm telling you why. So let's go at it. So Phil, give me an overview of your career to date.
So, I always like to share a little bit with who I am. So, I'm a wife of a proud Wiradjuri man, and that's really important for me to share because that's a really important part of who I am as a person and how I lead. We have 2 children together, Archer and Mila. who I am as a person and what's in my DNA is very much centered around purpose, passion, and positivity. And that's how I lead my life at home and how I show up as a leader. I think also sharing a little bit about me in terms of the things that I really hold myself accountable to and that I believe in are, being consistent and disciplined. And that's really a common theme with, getting up at 4:40 to do CrossFit. I'm still pretty shit at it, but, I'm going to keep cracking on and keep working at it. And they are the types of themes and personality traits that I bring into the workplace as well. In terms of my career journey, I've always been attracted to, large scale accounts. So in my early 20s, I started off working on IAG and I love that, and from there I've worked on Woolies, Suncorp, Westpac, New South Wales Government, to name a few. But, there's so much pride in working in some of Australia's and the globe's largest, most dynamic and most complex businesses. And I really thrive off the challenge and being able to rise to the challenge that some of these businesses have had. For me, I think as well, being able to partner with businesses as complex as this to really help them grow and transform, grow their brand, grow their profitability has given me a really deep sense of pride. And in that sort of 20-year career history, I've had the privilege of leading teams as large as 70, client stakeholder groups as large as 250, and also the joy of managing as up to 40 P&Ls at one time. But I think it's also important to share some pivotal moments in that story. When I was sort of in my late 20s, I had always had this dream of, kind of leaving the big smoke. And so I thought, if I don't do this now, I might never do it. So I actually packed up and left the industry that I know and love and the, physical and psychological safety that I have. And I moved 40 hours north to the Northern Territory and I worked on Australia's largest cattle station as a Jillaroo. And, that taught me so many lessons, which I've now brought back into my leadership today. Resilience, perspective, gratitude, appreciation, and an ability to learn new skills in a really quick way so that I could thrive in that environment too. And then look, in terms of next steps, as I said, I've always been drawn to positions of leadership in big, dynamic, energetic businesses. And so for me, I think these next steps are absolutely about enterprise and organizational leadership at that C-suite level.
Great. Thanks for the journey. Really interesting. So that was great. So there's a lot of positives in how you delivered that. Good storytelling, learned a lot about you. And actually, that's one of the things that typically I've got to draw out more, which is the personal story. I got a sense of the themes that are important with you, Phil, in terms of how you work. What I missed a little bit was, hey, what were the kind of organizations you worked at? Land some of the places you've worked at, perhaps some of the leaders have inspired you, bring it to life with the organizational journey as well. So otherwise, some of those kind of overarching points on leadership, they were a bit disconnected.
Yeah.
So I think if you connect them more to the journey, create the narrative from start to finish, you don't have to talk about every role move you've ever had, but that, create a kind of beginning, middle, end of the story, which you kind of talked about it in the whole. So It was really good, but I think just a bit more narrative through would be really good. Another piece that was missing too was the dismount. We talked about the future, and what's important to you from your life future, your career future. What goals are you setting, and what experiences do you think you need in order to achieve those goals? So that creates, I guess, the connection between what the interviewer is looking for, which is their future, and your future. Otherwise, it's just a historic look.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Fantastic.
Good tips.
That's okay. So let's try that. So what does the future look like, for you? What do you want to do next, and where is that going to take you?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of what's next, it is, as I said, that organizational and enterprise leadership, having the experience to play a more pivotal role in, delivering business strategy and business vision and how I execute that and how I lead teams of people. Can I ask, I know because we're doing this sort of as a mock interview, but what might be some of the specific things that I should talk about when I'm getting a little bit more granular there?
Yeah. So what I would recommend is you talk to perhaps experiences that you haven't had yet.
Yeah.
So you were quite general in the things you talked about there, which is fine. How does that manifest itself in terms of the organization or the roles that would get you that experience? So it might be, and bearing in mind, with the builds I gave you around perhaps landing some of the organizations you worked at, the experiences you had in those organizations, the journey those organizations went on, if you had a bit more of that in the journey, then when you look to the experiences to come, that feels connected. So it could be, I haven't worked in, I'm really keen to kind of create some variety around business ownership structures. I've typically worked in large listed organizations. I haven't worked in private equity yet. That's something I find really interesting. Or, I haven't worked in organizations with private ownership and when there's a longer term, strategic agenda. So I've been typically used to the cycle of a business which has to hit its quarterly numbers time and time again. So it could be the ownership structure that is different, or an organization that's going through huge M&A. I haven't done a lot of M&A. I think that'd be really useful because my long-term goal is to be a CEO of this type of organization. That's where I see myself in the next role or two. So I need to make sure I gather the right experiences to get to that point.
Yep.
That makes sense.
That makes sense.
Perfect. Good. But that was really good. That was that was a 4.5 out of 5. I really like that. And these are just small dial-ups to kind of get you to an absolute 5 out of 5. But well done.
Thanks.
Awesome. What we didn't do at the start, which we'd normally do too as well, bearing in mind this is we're trying to compress a bit into this. That was your journey, and I learned a lot about you. You did build social capital with me very quickly, which is really good. You got me interested. There is normally this kind of how do you kind of cope with the intro to the interview, and someone's just doing chit chat at the start. So we would do that normally, but guys, I'm not that clinical. I do normally want to get to know somebody and ask how's the day and all that kind of stuff to begin with. But we're trying to get through a lot in this interview session. So let's move on to section 2. Now, section 2 in a structured interview normally goes to what we call self-awareness. In more traditional interview speak is like, strengths and weaknesses. What are you good at? What are you not good at? And it feels quite traditional and mundane, but it's actually really multi-layered. If you look at the strengths piece, for instance, what I'm trying to get a sense of is, how well do you know yourself? Can you describe what you're good at? But more importantly, what does that mean? Because if you say strategically, I'm pretty good at putting together business plans, well, that's fine, but so is everybody else. So what does that actually mean to you in terms of how it manifests itself in the role? So you try to land a little bit of a mini example to bring it to life as opposed to leaving it in theory. So let's ask the question. So if I was to work with you, Phil, and if I was on a leadership team with you, what do you show up with every day? What are the 3 strengths I would see from you?
Well, people that know me know I show up with a bucket load of passion and energy. And I think, that's incredibly important from a leadership point of view, because you need that passion and energy to inspire, galvanize and mobilize, large teams of people to get behind the vision or the direction of the company. So that's definitely one of the traits. So I would say the second thing, and one that I'm really proud of, is how much I've invested in my relationships, especially at, the C-suite level. And that's really important because as we all, move into more senior organizational roles, being able to leverage the spheres of influence that we've created becomes incredibly important. And, the fact that I'm sitting here with you today, that's courtesy of the TMA. And that is a network which I invest so heavily in, but which has given me back so much in return. Similarly, for me, if I talk about relationships and ability to influence, that translates to media agencies, media partners, investors, but also a sense of curiosity means I'm a person that's quite comfortable with picking up the phone to a CEO that I've never met before to perhaps start a conversation, or a board member if I'm trying to research an item. So really being able to leverage those spheres of influence is certainly a trait that I lean heavily into. And then lastly, I think this is probably more of a personality trait and in my DNA, but, I'm a person that does not run out of will. And I'm a person that is able to make high quality decisions regardless of how I'm feeling. And I think that kind of tenacity, grit and entrepreneurial spirit is really important when you're talking about business leadership, because these are the qualities that you need to persevere, to show up time and time again, to bounce back really quickly and be resilient, to drive the outcomes that you need for the organization and the people.
That was great.
Oh, thanks.
It was really good. What most people struggle to do is to get beyond the theory.
Yes.
Because they're conceptualizing about themselves, it's very hard then to land it down in detail. But that was perfect. Second and third better than the first.
Yep.
But you got more comfortable with your, your answers.
Yeah.
But it felt real to me. I got a sense of, well, what does that kind of tenacity mean? How does it manifest itself? And our relationship developing, actually, how do you use that to be more effective in your role. Because what I'm trying to get a sense of is that's fine, but what does it mean in terms of impact? So that was perfect.
Yeah.
No bills.
Great. Thank you.
That's rare.
I'll take that.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one's a little bit more tricky.
Yes.
And people often get a little bit confused about this and they try and dodge the way around it. And good recruiters can see a dodge coming a mile away. I'm sure you won't, given the quality of conversation so far. But and it's about development. What are you not good at? And a hint in terms of how to deal with this, if you're not sure, if you find this a tricky area, I look at it from two perspectives. If someone asks you, hey, what are you not good at? What they're really saying is, one, again, how well do you know yourself? How do you know that about yourself? Are you open to feedback? Where does that kind of knowledge come from on, hey, I'm not so good at this stuff? Are you prepared to be authentic in the interview? And I want to know that I'm getting the real you. So are you going to share? And are you going to share? And an easy way to think about that is, this is what I'm not good at. And this is, if left unmitigated, this is the impact it has. So I've got to do something about it. Now, two perspectives I recommend you look at this from. One is, what is something you got better at? So something I wasn't very good at, it was important because it was causing a problem and I've understood the problem and I've worked on and got better at it. Then the second one is, we've all got stuff that no matter how hard we work on, we're never going to be good at. Your Achilles heel. So your second perspective might be, you know what, I'm never going to be good at this, but I know it's destructive. So I've learned to work around it, again, to mitigate impact. So as you can see, it's actually quite a lot in this.
Yes.
You can get this right and really create a point of difference in the interview, or you can kind of try and spin a strength into a weakness into a strength and all this kind of stuff. And the interview is going, I've heard it all before. Come on, tell me the real you. Bit of pressure, I know, but what are you not good at?
Oh, well, now I'm trying not to spin it, but I am a person that absolutely invests in their self-development and growth continually. So for me, something I'm very aware of is, because I am a high energy, passionate person, I go all in on things. That, I guess, energy and tenacity to be all in can mean if I'm excited about something, I'll fucking do it 20 hours a day, But that comes at a cost, and it comes at a cost to me physically, mentally, to my two kids, to my husband. So I have to be really intentional with how I use and deploy my energy and make sure that I'm really balanced. Because if I don't do that, I'm not going to, turn up as the best person possible at home and at work. One thing that, I've also really worked on over the last 10 years is, I think I'm now really happy to say I'm comfortable and proactively seek out feedback. But if we'd been sitting at the table 10 years ago, I don't want a bar of it. It makes me uncomfortable. I feel like I'm being criticized. Whereas, I think the TMA experience as well has really changed that dynamic for me. And whilst at times it can still be uncomfortable, it's something that I'm willing to lean into and something that I'm aware if I don't seek it out, I'm actually not going to continue to grow as a person.
Great.
That's a bit too spun, but
no, it's authentic.
It's a legit answer, yeah.
It's authentic. The advice I would give, I think you could build out a little bit, Phil. So, for instance, this ability to, and it is an ability to kind of throw yourself all in, it can be destructive, as you said. It can have a negative impact on people around you. And I would actually, if it's something you've worked on, you feel you got better at, I would draw a contrast.
Yeah.
And I would talk about, because you did mention, 10 years ago, for instance, you weren't open to feedback. So there's a linkage there. But you can say, for example, my natural instinct is to go and go and go until I get something done. Now, that has a negative impact in terms of it could be, you talked about physical health, mental health impact on others around you. But it could also have an impact on, does it show your team that you trust them? Does it actually create negative leadership behavior? Does it role model poor behavior for those around you in the workspace? So how it manifests itself, if left unchecked, I'd bring to life a little bit more, because that shows real self-awareness. So, be prepared to open that up a little bit and talk to impact. But then you can talk to, in real terms, because I know that's my style, that's what I do, this is what I've done about it. So you could, because you actually, if I'm a potential boss, chairman of the business, I'm kind of thinking, I'm going to know what I'm getting with you. And I'm going to know that you don't just know that, but you've got coping mechanisms already. Yeah. So it may be that, so I seek live input from my team. I tell them what my development areas are. They know this is my instinct, and they know when I'm going too far, and they know how to slow me down. So we've got a safe word or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
With something that is a coping mechanism that I use. And that tells you've gone the extra step. You've recognized it, but you're starting to deal with it as well.
Yeah.
You've got a way of doing it. And
Can I ask a question? Would one potential way to answer that is being really intentional about when it's a marathon that you're going to have to do as a team versus when it's a sprint? So there are times inevitably where we are as a team going to have to dig deep, but they're the sprint cycles, not the marathons.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's a model, right? Of how you deal with it, and you recognizing what mode you're in.
Yeah.
So that's perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
So it's really good. I think, again, good answer. It's really, the really authentic you. We're just going a little bit further with it.
Yeah.
And actually taking it again from a 4 to a 5 out of 5.
Perfect.
Yeah. Good. Excellent. For those who are on the live chat, please feel free to jump in. I know we're talking away and it feels like you don't interrupt an interview, but we're trying to keep our eyes open. If there's any questions you've got, just jump on and we'll ask. If you're on the podcast, sorry, you can't ask questions, but that's just the way podcasts go. So next, having gone through kind of the self-awareness section, we're going to move into the competency section. These can be quite tricky for lots of reasons. Sometimes you don't know what they're going to be and you're kind of, surprised on the day. Sometimes they're really well signposted and going into an interview that there's specific things need done in that business. You know what the responsibility of the role is to deliver against those things. And you're asked, to come prepared with examples of how you deal with issues or challenges or opportunities. So you think, okay, I've prepared, I'm ready to go. For those interviews, it's a little bit easier. But for those that they are, I guess, a little bit less signposted or unstructured, always be ready.
Yep.
You just need 5 or 6 examples of stuff that you've done that you've come to with a narrative from the story on that whatever the question is, you think, I've got something for that. Because often you might have a great example, Phil, on commercial acumen. The questions asked might not fit your examples. You've got to think, okay, have I got other examples in my backpack that I can just adjust and adapt to that particular question? So you've got to be ready. Now, in an unstructured interview as well, guys, one of the things that can be really challenging is if you're not clear at all what's being asked. You could be working with a CEO or a chairman or a CMO who just, his mind is all over the place. They could be an unstructured thinker, a brilliant individual. You want to work with them, but you don't know what's been asked. They're just talking away and landing point after point. You're getting quite excited in the conversation. And then they pause and you're like, oh, is it time for me to talk? Is that a question? I'm not very sure. Or they ask what seems like 6 questions at once. Very common to do in interviewing. And again, you're left wondering, what am I supposed to land here? Now, the trick there is to take control. In an unstructured interview, at any time, you can take control. You can acknowledge the conversation that's gone, and this is the way to do it. You say, look, really enjoying this conversation. You've made a bunch of interesting points there that, create real excitement for me in what you're trying to do. In order for me to give you an example of how I've worked that's on point with what you want to talk about, I get a sense that innovation is important. Would it be worthwhile me giving an example of how I created innovation in thinking in an organizational context? Yeah. And the interviewer might go, I'd love to hear about that, but no, what I was really interested was how you dealt with a messy stakeholder. You're like, well, thank goodness I didn't give you my innovation answer because that's not what you wanted to hear. So that pause, stop, clarify is a really good model to use and tip to use in a messy interview. Now,
can I ask a question on that? And this is, I guess, another one from TMA in that pause, stop, reflection. Another way of taking control is also, hey, this is what I've understood of what you've just asked me. Can I play that back and seek that clarification before I answer?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just did it better than me. That's ideal. Love it. In the structured interview we're doing today, we'll do 1 or 2. We'll see how we go. From a storytelling point of view, there's two things to remember here, Phil. One is the formula is dead easy: context, action, result. Context is the most important because it shows business thinking. It shows depth by which you analyze a problem. It shows, are you a leadership thinker or are you a functional thinker? So that leads us to our second point, which is think macro. Always, and no matter what level you're at in an organization, go to the next level up and think, I've got to put on the hat of the more senior leader I can think of, and how would they see this potential challenge or problem? So you start with as macro as you can, then you in your context setting, try and land some key performance indicators, which means when you step through your functional action piece and get the result, you can layer the result back up to the macro and the KPIs at an organizational level. Now, I know there's a lot in that, but we'll give it a go. So let's use strategy as an example of the first competence, a common one for a role you'd be going for. Okay, so strategy. So Phil, use an example to describe how you've connected functional goals with enterprise goals and how you've executed a plan that is delivered for the total business.
An example of one of the organizations that I have worked at some time in the last, we'll say for this instance, last couple of years, were the business strategy seemed a little hard to execute when it came down to the leaders delivering the functional goals. So I was really keen to understand, we've got the business vision, we've got the business strategy, but what are the actual steps to operationalize, execute, activate that and drive results? And for me, it was actually going and understanding the steps in the middle, and that was the actual business plan and the strategy itself, which the business leaders do. And I found that there was a real opportunity to, I guess, add a little bit more layers and context and buy-in to deliver better outcomes. So this example was sharing my observation of that current business strategy, managing that up with the CEO, with the COO and with the CFO, and saying, hey, I think there's a real opportunity here to create some optimizations in how we're approaching this. And then giving me the opportunity to actually rewrite the structural premise of an output of that business plan. So we moved away from purely numerical inputs into creating more context around what our clients were trying to achieve, brought more people from our organization into that process. So rather than just that point person managing the client business, we brought in our SBUs and our out-of-scope capabilities to really understand the pressures that our clients were facing and to collaboratively come up with more meaningful business solutions for our clients. So we're moving that, I guess, the scale and potential of impact from a business leader to much more broadly across the business to come up with better business solutions. And I guess in terms of the results of that, when we went back and asked our, 45 business leaders who had created these plans and executed these plans, the scale of usefulness shifted over a 12-month period from an 8.2 to a 9.4 in 12 months. So better business for us, better outcomes for our clients, and more engaging and more useful for the people within our organization as well.
Great. Really good example. I think there's a couple of things we could do to take that to the next level, but because it's actually a really good example. And I think my first piece of advice would be create more of a burning platform up front around what was the impact of doing nothing? Was the business at risk of underachieving because of the disconnect between the business strategy and the execution piece? Therefore, what was the scale of the opportunity to actually improve? And could you measure that? Was that in line with actually where the business could be, and was this hindering the business getting to its goals? So I know we're talking a little bit in confidence here, and maybe that's why you shied a little bit away from that. But I would be encouraging in a real interview to be more specific on impact and measurables up front in terms of scope of risk and scope of opportunity. Because what you did really well steps through what you did. It was excellent. Is this how we kind of set up the plan and connect to people, brought everyone on the journey, and you're able to give some measurable around impact at the end. But if you put more in upfront around, the measurability of opportunity for what this organization could achieve, then you can actually land that at the end as well and talk in real terms. Yeah.
So risk, potential, qualified measurement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But really good.
You did catch me off guard because I had a couple of examples and I'm like, I've got all my stats. I'm going to nail it. And, you asked me something which I'd probably prepared slightly less for. So, yeah.
That's what can happen,
right? The back pocket. I needed more in my back pocket.
You do, yeah.
Pockets aren't big enough.
Pockets aren't big enough. Pockets are going to be bulging. Cool. Let's do another one. We'll do one on leadership, right? And give you another go here because I think you've got it in you. It's a really good interview. So same formula, context, action, result. Leadership's a tougher one, but you can do it to kind of think about create that burning platform up front in terms of why it was important, and then you lead into what you did. Just describe the highest performing team that you've ever led. Take me through why it was high performing and what did you have to do to get it there?
So look, I think the highest performing team I've ever led is for one of the largest financial organizations from an agency perspective. And I would say what made that team high performing was the fact that we collectively were able to create some real cultural glue and direction that we were all moving towards together. So, our ethos around being highest performing is that under no circumstances would we ever rest on our laurels, that we would continually push, be curious and evolve. And I think some of the credentials that we create around performance were really important, and being able to draw examples. So it used to be the All Blacks, but now I've upgraded and I've gone for the Matildas. But what's in the DNA of those teams and what's in the DNA of the leadership that brings those teams together. So understanding the qualities of high-performing teams so we know what we're striving towards. But also, I think, broadening people's acumen. So for us, this particular team was not just about we want to be brilliant technically, but we also wanted to be brilliant when it came to commercial acumen, when it came to business acumen, when it came to marketing acumen. And that meant people from the most junior level to the most senior level could really lead, instigate, guide and influence conversations with our clients and in the business in a way which was really quite unique and that other teams were just not doing at that time. The other part of creating high-performing teams is being very, very intentional with how you build them. So this one particular team was arguably one of the most diverse teams in Australia. We had over 15 different nationalities. We had beautiful representation from the LGBTQI plus A community. We had people that were neurodiverse, multiple different ethnicities, etc. And we had people also that were representing First Nations communities. And why that's so important is without having that diversity of people and being brave enough to hire people who we're not comfortable with, who are not like us, being very intentional with how we hire, without taking that approach, you are not going to get that diversity of thought and that ability to challenge each other and look at it business problems and client solutions in a much more different way. So that approach meant that we stood in the top 5% nationally in terms of team happiness and engagement. And rightly or wrongly, that also means that that cultural glue and fellowship that you build, those people are much more likely to move with you. So if that's moving to another team, moving to another organization, and in all instances of leadership, I've really had the privilege of people wanting to continue on that journey with me as well.
Really powerful. Yeah, it's great.
Oh,
it sounds like a brilliant team.
Oh, they were bloody fantastic. Yeah.
So the build for this one, Phil, is a little bit same as the last one, but I'll be more specific. So what's in it for the business? It felt like a really great team to be part of, and there was a real sense of high engagement, and you can infer from that high performance. Typically, high engagement means high performance, but what's in it for the business? So if you take again a step back as an overall business leader, you want to see a team like that, and it feels great, but you also want to know, what does that mean for the organization in terms of performance? Have they been able to turn up the dial and deliver over and above, and if so, how do I measure that? So if you, again, back to this whole piece on the organizational journey at the time was X, so you start with that, always start with that organizational journey, and what was important for the business to achieve or the organization to achieve was Y. Let me show you how I built a team that actually helped the organization achieve that. Yeah. So you're kind of starting as this business leader, everything's back to business leadership, enterprise leadership, how you built a functional team that smashed out the park, and what did that do for the organization? Yeah.
Even from that feedback that you've just given me there were, 3, I guess, qualified areas that I would include in my next answer, which would be, client engagement scores, potentially the commercial growth delivered over that period of team leadership, and then how that translated to the client business, whether that be NPS or whatever it might be. So perfect. A couple of qualified measures.
Absolutely perfect. Yeah. Because that then, again, if I'm the interviewer, I'm thinking, that's great, but was it just a warm and fuzzy place, or did it actually have a tangible impact? So it's being able to achieve both, which you all, and your follow-ups are perfect, by the way. That's exactly what you need to do.
Yeah.
That's great. Really, really good. So those are the 3 main sections we stepped through in an interview. So you've got to, if you can, I guess, rephrase and summarize. Step 1 is be able to tell your own story. It's like a life skill. Who am I and how did I get to this point and what does my future look like in life and in career? And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do well. And you were 90% of the way there. It was really, really good. Then how well do you know yourself? The strengths and weaknesses, and do I know how I show up and what impact I have for good and for bad? And how do I work around that and involve others on my own personal journey? And then finally, how do I perform in a role, which is the things that are important to the role I'm being interviewed for? Have I got examples that will make sense to them in terms of the impact I can have in an organization? Because if I've done it before, I can probably do it again. So you're doing that. Now, there's a couple of things we haven't done today. We talked about the personal bit at the start. We probably do more on what do you do right now? What's your role? What do you look? What's your mandate? What impact have you had? So just kind of ticking off some of the, has she done the technical stuff that we need to be done? So that probably comes as part of it as well. Yeah. That's the easier bit to get right. This is what we've done today is the hard stuff, and I think you absolutely knocked it out of the park.
Thank you.
Really good job.
Thanks.
That's not where the interview ends. There is another part to it. And often people turn off at this point and they go, thank God it's done. I think I've nailed it. I think I've done it right. And then, you hear this thing about, do you have any questions? And the most soul destroying thing as an interviewer is to kind of go, that was a great interview. Please have questions. And someone goes, oh no, I'm good.
Yeah.
I feel you've answered all my questions. And you're running for the door. And it is just the biggest disappointment. The question section is really important. For lots of reasons, it shows curiosity, engagement. It lets you take control because you want to know as well, is this the place for me? Is this the journey I want to go on? So your chance to interview the interviewer is one you should absolutely embrace with both hands.
Yeah.
So I know we're not talking about real job today, but what sort of questions might you ask, Phil?
Yeah, I certainly always have questions prepared. And I think to your point, it's really important for the interviewee to get that sense of, hey, is this organization right for me? It's not a one-way street. So I'm always curious to know around the specific role that I might be interviewing for. What role does that play within the broader business vision? How does this role specifically ladder up to that? Personal and professional development is incredibly important to me. So I would always be curious to understand how the organization invests in their employees in that regard. And then, of course, anything from a commercial or package point of view, next steps and timelines. But I also think it's really important, if you genuinely feel it, to make sure the interviewee knows, hey, I just want you to know, I'm really excited about this role and, I'm really looking forward to those next steps. I think that is important to convey your sense of energy and enthusiasm for a role. And, I think the person who interviews you is their bullshit radar is going to be on, they'll get a genuine sense of whether you mean that or not.
Yeah, I agree. All good questions. And I'll come to the last one last, but before I do, I know we've gone through a lot today. Now, we've got a guide at AXR called How to Get Interview Fit. We've co-branded that with TMA. And so everybody in the TMA alumni is going to get access to that guide. So we're going to take you through all the bits and pieces, including this section on questions. So there's loads of good stuff for you to kind of to pick up on there. And if you're a podcast listener and not part of TMA, then you just need to contact one of the team at AXR. You can get access to that as well, but it won't be branded TMA. So it's like a special edition we're producing.
It is.
Thanks, Mike. We actually have a question from the crowd, if that's okay.
Go for it, Jade.
I think it was back on the earlier section where you were giving an example to the leadership piece. So the question is, when you say the business, is it the one that you're telling the story about or the one that you're actually interviewing for?
I guess today's all been about your career, Phil, so the business you worked for. I think that's what I'm really looking for. I'm interviewing you to understand about, your experience and your capability relative to the journey my organization's going on if I was running an organization you're interviewing for. So I think we're reflecting on the business that you've worked for, businesses you've worked for, as opposed to the business that I might be representing.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Jade.
And if you've got one piece of advice for our listeners today and the future listeners on the podcast, what would it be?
Well, you actually gave me this advice, and it was, always be interview ready. I think it's not because you're looking for a job, but opportunities might come up, and just keeping your CV up to date. That's something that you were like, I always update my CV when I've achieved something at work. I add those quality metrics into what I've done. So I think it's really hard if you're at an organization that you love and, an opportunity might come up in 6 years, but it's going to be fucking hard to remember what you did in those last 6 years. So just really keeping abreast of those quality metrics and those achievements, so you've got those important and qualified stories if and when an opportunity does come up.
Great. Thank you.
We just launched a new pod series called How To. And the first one came out today, actually. It's called How to Work with a Recruiter. One of the points that's made on that is you don't just work with a recruiter when you're looking for a job. You have an ongoing, the most senior people have ongoing relationships that last years and decades with recruiters because they see them as careers advisors. And it's exactly the same way. You're not, if you're only ready to interview when you're looking for a job, then you're backpedaling already. It's tough. Be interview ready, which is why this session's important at any time. Have your CV ready. Be ready for the conversation. It doesn't mean to say you're leaving a company. It just means that you're making good ongoing decisions on your value and your career journey because, the perfect time that you're ready isn't the perfect time the world is ready for you. The two don't often go hand in hand. So you just got to be consciously ready for the conversation and prepared to jump in when you least expect it. Cool.
Great. We've got another question here, if that's okay.
One last one.
So what is an employer really looking for when they ask about your weaknesses or areas for growth? Is it actually about authenticity or is it more complex than that?
It's more complex, but it starts with authenticity. That's probably the most important one. So whoever's asked the question has identified that really well. Because they're looking for how much you're prepared to share. Are you, the way in which you do it is really important because if you are going to be authentic, then you're actually telling the interviewer, hey, this is me. And I'm going to tell you some stuff that I'm generally not good at, but I'm also showing I've got a growth mindset. I'm also showing I've got learning agility. I'm also showing how do I involve others with my development? There's so many levels to how you can make that a super strong answer. If you try and dance through it quickly, or try and sidestep it, you're just missing a massive opportunity. Guys, that's great. I want to just give a couple more tips on the questions piece, then we'll close. But so if you're, again, uncertain, what question do I ask? Phil used some great ones there. And the formula is start with the organization. Do you know the journey of the organization? Do you understand what they're trying to achieve? Because if you don't, then how can you make a decision of that's a train you want to get on? So make sure that you either going in or coming out the interview knowing I'm really clear on this journey. Secondly, leadership. How does that journey come to life in terms of the leadership style and structure of the organization? How do people connect to that journey? Can the interviewer articulate that? Or if they can't, then maybe there is no connection and you've got to kind of a little red flag there. So be sure there's a connection between leadership and journey. Then thirdly, how does this role connect, which is the question you asked? How does this role ladder up to the organizational journey? And if it doesn't, then again, you've got to think, well, what's the impact of this? If this is a disconnected, isolated role, is that really for me? So you can see the formula. You need to be digging into each step of the way because you're on a journey, you join an organization, you don't join a job. The job's just a landing point, it's just a way in. So people get very fixated on what will I do in this job? That's important, but it's probably fourth on the list or third on the list. And then finally is, people often think to ask about salary, what do I do about remuneration? There's nothing worse than getting to the end of a process and you're miles off. Your expectation isn't, what's being offered. So you've got to be clear from the very first conversation with the recruiter who has approached you, or if you've applied for a role, is it in the ballpark? It doesn't need to be, hopefully it's not overpaid or underpaid, it just needs to be a market rate and you can make an informed decision. Otherwise, you're going to be very disappointed if you get to the end and you're lowballed because you've not asked the question or they've not shared. So be clear on that. And finally, top tip, I love what you said, Phil, around showing interest. Don't close in a salesy way. Don't let people who say to me, well, have I got the job or are you shortlisting me? I think that directness I find uncomfortable, but your way of doing it was brilliant, Phil. I think you and I like this to say, just, can you take me through next steps and when they might happen? It's a nice gentle close. It's a close, but it's in a much more professional way, I think. Great stuff. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Phil, for being such a good candidate.
Thank you for having me.
You've made it on
My pleasure.
You've made it onto the shortlist.
Great.
Thanks to my co-host, Jade.
Thank you, Mike, so much for kicking off this partnership.
And the TMA for setting us up. I think really enjoyed it. We've never done a live interview on the pod before. We interview lots of people, and often we give feedback. The candidate says, "I wish you could record this because I want to have this to remember." Yeah. So we've done it today, which is brilliant. So I hope not just the live audience today, but the millions that listen to the podcast can get some value from your excellent answers today, Phil. Now, as always, reach out to any of us at the XR team for a career conversation. Access to our salary guides, the how-to pod I mentioned, market blogs, much, much more as we help guide your future in sales and marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's top sales and marketing leaders. You just can't get this career advice anywhere else. My name is Mike Dickson. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.